through this book, Agius to Burbs, and also in your other research, what are you trying to get at with your research?
Mexican migration to the United States is a low-wage labor migration. Most Mexican immigrants come to the U.S. to work. Many are unauthorized, they lack educations, and so scholars were just saying that Mexicans would overwhelmingly remain in poor and low-income areas and would never have the opportunity to achieve upward mobility. And we're really treating Mexican Americans as this monolithic, homogeneous ethnic group.
So far, how has your research been received? Even before we get to the research, what have been your findings? So obviously you come in with this idea, I'm going to examine the Mexican American middle class. Contemporary research says they're next to non-existent, and the path toward that upwardly mobile class is next to impossible, but what were your findings?
Well, one of the things I wanted to mention is that previous researchers examining the assimilation of immigrants assumed that any immigrants who achieved upward mobility would assimilate or incorporate in what they call a straight line, meaning that they would go from immigrant to becoming just like the host society. And in the case of the United States, the host society has typically been middle-class white. So scholars assumed that any Mexicans at all who achieved upward mobility would just disappear into the white middle class. Find that yes, some Mexican Americans over the generations do incorporate into the white middle class, but I also find that there is this middle class Mexican American population that is emerging, that stays Mexican and retains an ethnic identity, that gives back to the ethnic community, but that is also middle class. So I find that you don't have to become white to become part of the middle class.
The book starts like a Horace Greeley fable. So can you talk about the very intro to the book? Like, just set up the scene. Where are we? Who are we talking to? And what's sort of the twist?
Yeah. So the book starts off talking about one of my respondents, and I go to his home to interview him. And he lived in this beautiful home. There's a minivan in the driveway, and just a beautiful sea of green for his lawn, and begonias are lining the pathway. And I walk up to the door, and his beautiful wife answers the door, and there's flat screen TVs, and I look out to the backyard, and I see this gleaming pool. He wanted to live on Maple Circle, the street where he now lives. And it was just his dream growing up as a child to live on Maple Circle. And he used to visit Maple Circle as a child. And so in my head I thought, oh, well, he must have had a playmate. He came, to the street to visit his friends. But then he revealed that actually he used to come to Maple Circle, and actually to the very house where he now lives, with his mother, who was a cleaning woman. And so he didn't ride bikes in the cul-de-sacs with the neighboring children. He actually used to help his mom scrub toilets and clean floors.
As an academic, why is it important to have those serious sit-down interviews or even integrate yourself? Because you can easily impress people with all this jargon, all these numbers, and still make your point across. But the beauty of your book and really your research is you do pull these anecdotes from people, and you're able to write them very well. So why was that important to you to get those personal stories there?
It is so important for me to tell people's stories because I'm really just the messenger and the interpreter. It is so important for me as a researcher to see how people are affected in their everyday life, and you can't extrapolate that from mere numbers. And so interviews allow you to talk to people face to face, to ask in-depth questions, to ask follow-up questions. Who were like, oh yeah, I had whatever I needed, I got allowance every week, I had Atari.
Yeah, that was their Atari. Our generation now was well, my generation was Sega, this generation's Xbox, so it always changes sometimes.
So what I found is that those who grow up poor or who grow up in low-income ethnic communities feel much more attached to their ethnicity and feel like they're much more authentic, versus those who grow up middle class feel as if they aren't accepted. Oftentimes when they tell people that they're Mexican, not just amongst Mexicans who call them a pocho, meaning you're like a white, kind of assimilated Mexican, but also from their middle class white friends who, if they say I'm Mexican, they'll tell them, oh no you're not insert whatever derogatory racial slur, because people have a very narrow stereotype of what it means to be Mexican.
Or you're not one of those kinds of Mexicans.
You're not one of those.
How does the Mexican-American middle class compare to other middle class groups and other either ethnic groups or immigrant groups as well?
The Mexican-American middle class has similarities and differences. So one of the first inspirations for my research was actually research on the black middle class. Because research on the black middle class was very similar to research on Mexican Americans. All of these scholars, William Julius Wilson is one of the big proponents of this idea, was kind of that there was really no black middle class, and that blacks were going to be relegated to poverty. And then there was some research that emerged on the black middle class. And so middle-class Mexican Americans are similar to the black middle class in that the black middle class also retains ties to poor co-ethnics.
People are freaking out that there's so many Latinos, there's all these stereotypes, but what do the trends show? Are Mexican Americans moving up into the middle class? Is it at a rate equal at or even better than other immigrant groups, or is it more just like traditional paths of upward mobility among Americans, period?
Well, first I'll start out just kind of by talking a little bit about the demographics. So Latinos now comprise about 17% of America's population. It's the fastest growing ethnic group. The demographers estimate that by 2040, the Latino population will double to about 30%, and the white population will comprise less than 50% of the US. So by 2040, the US will no longer be it will become a minority majority country. Now, the growth in the Latino population is coming not from immigration. Immigration from Mexico, for example, is at net zero. There's no immigration from Mexico. There's no unauthorized immigration from Mexico right now. People always freak out when I tell them this because it totally contradicts the stereotypes. Yeah. So the growth in the Latino population is coming from the growth in the native-born population, the second and third generation. So it's very, very important because Latinos in particular, they're a young population, they're going to comprise a larger proportion of the working age population as the baby boomers retire en masse. So it's very, very important that we put the structures in place to make sure that Latinos become structurally incorporated.
What about skin color, moreno?
Does skin color play any influence in upward mobility?
Skin color, there's conflicting conclusions about skin color in research. There's a lot of research which says skin color matters, and there's a lot of research which says, well, we didn't really find as much of an effect with skin color. I do find that skin color leads to more discrimination. So people with darker skin face many more racial stereotypes. The difference is, though, that if you grow up middle class, over time, you whiten. People whiten you. So people don't see your skin. People that get in my respondents would say this, when people get to know me, then my skin color, they don't see it as much anymore. Right. But if you grow up in a lower class household and you don't evince middle class status cues, then you aren't whitened as much. So yeah, money can whiten you.
One last question from Councilmember Bruce Whitaker of Fullerton. Thank you so much for coming.
I just have a question. With upper middle class, did you determine that there was much, what was the level of comfort with the material success? Or did you determine there was some guilt or anxiety regarding that level of success?
Are these middle class Mexican Americans happy? Or do they rue the fact that they're successful in this country because they themselves have the stereotype that Mexicans are not supposed to succeed in this country?
Middle-class Mexican Americans are very proud of what they have achieved. And they feel that they owe all of their success to their parents. They feel that their parents came here, sacrificed for them, worked in backbreaking jobs. Some of my respondents talked about how, their parents had their fingers cut off on the assembly line, or they helped their parents pick avocados or tomatoes to make extra money. So they are they're happy, they feel American, they love America, they feel like the opportunities they have were only given to them because their parents brought them here. Because I call this an immigrant narrative, that they feel like their success would not be possible without their parents' sacrifices.
You have books here for sale?
I do.
What's the price?
They are $30.
$30 cheap. The retail price is $60. You're getting a huge discount. Definitely buy the book. Thank you so much, Professor Vallejo. I appreciate it. I want to thank all of you again. I want to thank all the sponsors, the Cal State Fullerton, Barrio kind of Studies, the Fullerton Library, the OC Weekly. KCRW is also a sponsor recently. I hope to see you guys again.